A highly sensitive leak now reveals that several countries are on the verge of establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This is revealed by Binance CEO Tung, who is currently actively working on Bitcoin strategies in an advisory role with several countries. Among others, China is considered a very strong candidate. Additionally, we have Donald Trump, who is escalating once again, and for the first time quite openly. He talks about Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, being fired. And to Jerome Powell, he says, lower the interest rates, boy. Finally start printing money here. We need to pump the markets. Though he didn't actually say that as a quote. But we also need to look at the fact that Donald Trump is really escalating now. And he is putting pressure on the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the USA. We now actually have a Binance Times article where the Binance CEO clearly explains that he is currently in contact with several countries to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve to set up. And that's pretty amazing here. However, he also clearly stated that he cannot mention specific names here. Nevertheless, we are looking into why China could potentially be the candidate to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There have been a few rumors. I have briefly mentioned something about it before, but now there are new, insightful developments. In any case, he says here, we actually have a large number of inquiries from some governments and sovereign funds. So not just governments, but also sovereign funds, for example, like Abu Dhabi, and so on, that are aiming to establish their own crypto reserves. So not just Bitcoin, but also crypto. And it doesn't sound like it might happen or might not happen, but it clearly states that assistance is being provided in establishing strategic Bitcoin reserves. So, strategic Bitcoin reserves are definitely being established here. It's always a question of whether to make such things public or not, which is probably also clearly going to be the case. I also highly suspect that Pakistan is on the list. The Binance founder CZ was recently in Pakistan and even gave an interview there, and he also advised the Pakistani government. And CZ surely still has some contact with Binance, and it might also be related to the fact that Pakistan is on this list. There was also an article about it on WatchGuru. It is written here, indeed, the development could be monumental for the asset class on a global scale. So the development here could be extraordinary, here for the entire asset class, because it would simply mean massive buying demand if nation-states start buying Bitcoin, and it is very likely inspired by the USA. Bo Hines also said, hey, he assumes that if they establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve with the USA, then other countries will follow suit, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Of course, it always takes a bit of time to consult, to go through everything, and so on. In the USA, it doesn't happen just suddenly either. But this is simply a very, very exciting development. And I've talked about this before. Max Kaiser always says here, and this is another quote from him, it is confirmed that China is buying Bitcoin. According to his view, and this is just a few days old, 10, 15 days or something like that, he says here, it is confirmed that China is buying Bitcoin. We also have a quote from Binance founder CZ, who says here, nations will print unlimited money to buy. So here, they will start the money printing press, and then buy Bitcoin endlessly. I don't know which nation he meant here, of course, but his big take is that nations will start buying Bitcoin. I made a video this morning about how the strategic Bitcoin reserve bill in Oklahoma failed, but that's just one of many, many attempts happening worldwide in parallel. In the USA at the state level, at the national level then, here. In various stories, so Pakistan, China we have now, Russia is also a potential country being speculated about. Then, there are now emerging countries like Suriname, El Salvador. They have been buying 1 Bitcoin every day for a while now. And then, there was also an article from the blog Trainer. It says here, China introduces new rules for confiscated cryptocurrencies. And I already reported on this 2 days ago, I believe, or was it a day ago, where it was simply about the fact that China is currently having discussions, okay, how can they handle the confiscated Bitcoin? And some have said that China is selling Bitcoin. Some have said they have already sold it. It has been very, very unclear whether they have already been sold or if they are selling Bitcoin. And yet others have said that China is currently planning to convert these Bitcoins into a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And that's where some of the rumors come from about why China could be the next player to bet on Bitcoin. I mean, Donald Trump always says, hey, we need to be ahead of China here. Bo Hines also reiterated it. We need to be the innovators here before China catches up. That means Donald Trump might secretly already know that China is planning to buy Bitcoin. Donald Trump is definitely afraid of the event that China could potentially be the first player, the first major nation to establish a Bitcoin reserve strategy or something like that. But on the other hand, there are always indecisive statements from China, so it's not entirely clear. But that could also be a tactic, because that's actually much, much smarter from a game theory perspective. Outwardly, you get the impression that, yes, we have no interest in Bitcoin. That's how it was with Bhutan as well. Bhutan, they didn't reveal for about 4 or 5 years that they were doing Bitcoin mining, and it only came out by chance, through some legal issue. Otherwise, we still wouldn't know today that Bhutan is engaged in Bitcoin mining. And I just think that's the approach that many nations will take, because they simply say, okay, I don't really have an advantage if I make this public, unless I've already accumulated so much Bitcoin that I can flex with it somewhere, and maybe trigger a FOMO. And in doing so, or you want resources, or you want Bitcoin or everything. You want to buy as cheaply as possible. And you can't buy things as cheaply as possible if you drive the price up yourself by creating FOMO. So, I could definitely imagine that maybe this year we might still definitely see a country that adopts Bitcoin also publicly announces, we now have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I am very confident about that. It's also important to note that it's much easier to do something like this when the price is going up. That means the announcement will most likely not come when the price is currently stagnant. El Salvador did it that way, but they also had a really hard time because in the first 1 or 2 years, they only received negative press because they announced it during a bear market. And I think other countries have learned from that you should potentially announce something like this during a bull run or similar. Announced. I can well imagine that when the Bitcoin price is over 100,000 again, a few announcements could really come. You just don't know. It's also a bit of speculation, you have to say that too. And now something really significant has happened here, something intense, and we'd had this dispute the whole time. And I've often reported to you that Donald Trump absolutely wants to get rid of Jerome Powell. And now he's really making a viral tweet that's going massively viral, where he makes it clear again, hey Jerome Powell, you can't continue like this. He writes here very clearly, the ECB is expected to cut interest rates for the 7th time in a row. And yet Jerome Powell from the Fed, who is always late and wrong, was late again yesterday. He released a report that was once again a complete mess. As usual, he said, Jerome Powell is always too late. Jerome Powell always cuts interest rates too little. And it wasn't really a report, but rather an interview he gave yesterday, and he delivered a speech. And he clearly stated, no, the Fed will not do any Fed food here. They will not come and bail out the markets. They will not come and save the markets. Everyone expected that. And then the stock market initially sold off very strongly. And Donald Trump sees this as a direct attack. He doesn't like what Jerome Powell is doing here at all. And Donald Trump is currently investigating whether they can remove Jerome Powell. He is really trying to use all means to oust him. And I already told you yesterday that what Jerome Powell said in the speech, Donald Trump will not like it, because many assume that Donald Trump is bringing uncertainty into the market so that he can lower the interest rates. But Jerome Powell clearly said, no, he will not be unsettled. The uncertainty is actually the reason why he cannot lower the interest rates, because it first needs to be resolved and crystallize in which direction the market is heading and what the situation with all the tariffs is. And only when there is more clarity in the market can decisions be made at all. Donald Trump further said, oil prices have dropped, food, even eggs are cheaper, and the USA is earning plenty from tariffs. The interest rates should have been lowered long ago, like the ECB has done, but he should definitely lower them now. Paul's dismissal can't come soon enough, so just consider that. He even wants to actively dismiss Jerome Powell now. I don't think we've ever talked about a dismissal like this before. This is the first time he's talking about a dismissal. But I find that quite shocking, of course. I mean, for Bitcoin, this could potentially be bullish because the more money is pumped into the market, the more bullish it is for Bitcoin. Jerome Head also writes, it's time for Scott Bessent to have breakfast with Powell again. That was quite a big deal too. There was an interview between Scott Bessent, and I don't even remember where it was. It was somewhere on CNBC or something. And Scott Bessent actually said that he goes to breakfast with Jerome Powell not every day, but once a week. It's quite a big deal, of course, that the U.S. Treasury Secretary meets with the Fed chair once a week to discuss, I don't know, whatever they talk about. Maybe they only discuss personal matters, but they certainly do. They also discuss monetary policy matters, and you can see that they are all somehow intertwined. And one or the other exerts pressure and so on. So, Jerome Powell is supposed to be independent. It's somewhat like in Germany, where there have been court cases or something like that. And then it's said that the courts are somehow completely independent or something. But shortly before any decisions are made, some top politician meets with a judge. And later there's a judge who is basically handling a case against that very politician or something. So there have been such cases quite often. And it's similar here. That means the people who are supposed to be independent are officially so, but unofficially, behind the scenes, and so on, they of course meet. We still have the issue that the Federal Reserve is supposed to be audited. Not just the Federal Reserve, but also Fort Knox. Elon Musk suggested it. Yes, Ron Paul suggested it. They say not only should it be audited, but they even go so far as to say the Federal Reserve must be stopped. And the Fed, I would also say, and the ECB. And with Donald Trump, we haven't heard him say, and the Fed. But I could imagine that Elon Musk is also a spokesperson here for Donald Trump. And if Elon Musk says in the Fed, then of course he wants that too, Donald Trump. But of course, he has to hold back a bit politically. There was always the great statement from Ron Paul, where he was asked in an interview, like, yeah, what if the Fed is audited? What would come out of it? What would be discovered? Then Ron Paul simply said he couldn't say exactly what would be discovered, but an audit would automatically lead to its closure. Because if the Fed is audited, then so much dirty stuff will definitely come to light that this thing has to be shut down and this institution is no longer sustainable. Donald Trump also repeatedly said, okay, his tariff issues and so on. He gave a speech and said, yeah, the thing with the tariffs is, yeah, so cool. Because until 1913, everything was really, really cool in the USA. And they just had a tariff policy like that. And since 1913, everything has gotten worse. And one reason why things have gone downhill since 1913 is not necessarily because the tariff policy changed, perhaps also because the fact that the Federal Reserve was founded back then, and Donald Trump alluded to it in his speech. Since 1913, things have been portrayed very, very poorly in the USA. However, he didn't directly talk about the Fed, but rather blamed it on the tariffs. But many also assume that it was a subtle nod, implying that he wanted to attack the Fed and say that since 1913, things have been going downhill here. But maybe he can't express it directly, so he uses subtle methods to convey it and bring it to the world. On the other hand, it seems that Jerome Powell really doesn't care. He has often been asked whether it has any influence on him. He always says, no, 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 it has no influence on him. I find what's going on here highly critical. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the laughing third winner in this whole dispute, I'll put a link below for you. 21 Bitcoin. Here you can safely and easily buy Bitcoin. Use the code Bitcoin. Here you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Whether you're a beginner, professional, advanced, it doesn't matter. Bitcoin. 21 Bitcoin is really highly recommended here. See you then. Peace out.